Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We'll start in just about another minute, but we'll just want to remind folks to mute your mic whenever you're not speaking to minimize background noise. Well, welcome to today's webinar on the National Trauma Campaign. It's good to be together always, and especially given the times we're all living through together right now. I'm Marla Nash, and I'm a member of the National Trauma Campaign team. I work for St. Francis Ministries, which is a national and international trauma-informed nonprofit organization that built and restored well-being for children and families, particularly those who become involved in the child welfare system. We work in 7 states in Central America, and I'm honored to be a part of the campaign core team, and we will introduce the rest of the team in a moment, and you will hear from many of them today in the webinar. The webinar is being recorded, and the PowerPoint will be available after today. You'll learn more details about how to access the recording and the slides before our time together ends today. Today's webinar is set up to serve 2 purposes. First, some of you have joined because you've already applied and have signed on to be local liaisons for the National Trauma Campaign. For you, this webinar is intended to serve as an orientation to you for your role. Some of you have joined because you may be interested in becoming a local liaison, and this webinar will serve the purpose of giving you more information. And for everyone, we will have time for Q&A, and we want to make sure that you have all of your questions answered so that you feel included and engaged and supported in the campaign. And there are others of you who may have signed on as an individual or as an organization for the campaign. And I just want to clarify right at the get-go that anything the campaign does is open for anyone in any role. It's just that local liaisons we've asked to play a particular role, which we will walk through today. There's important work ahead. This campaign was launched in February and is set up to educate and engage Congress as part of what is needed to help the United States become a trauma-informed nation. With the coronavirus outbreak and pandemic, we now know that getting our federal leaders to take actions in support of preventing and addressing trauma was already vital and is now even more important. For our agenda today, as I said, we'll introduce the rest of the campaign core staff in just a moment. You will hear background on the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice, who's our organizational sponsor for the campaign, and background on the National Trauma Campaign. We'll offer a campaign overview, including how the campaign works and the different campaign roles. There's local liaisons, members, and organization members, as I mentioned a moment ago, and the resources and supports that are available for the campaign and how you can access them. So we'll walk through our website, which is the primary source of access. We'll cover the calls to action that we have now and next steps, including addressing COVID-19 and the campaign's role in trauma response. As you can imagine, we are continuing to work through exactly what that looks like because of how quickly everything is moving, but it is obvious to all of us, and I'm sure to you, that this campaign can be very vital in the nation's response to COVID-19. So we are definitely thinking through that, and we'll want your input today and as we go along. We'll have times for Q&A, and then we will wrap up. So with that, I believe I'm turning it over to Whitney to introduce the campaign core team.
Thanks so much, Marlo. This is our campaign core team, and beginning with Dan Press. He is a partner at Van Ness Feldman and the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practices pro bono attorney. And I would say he's the heart and soul of this campaign. He really is the person who gathered us all together in the first place. And you just got to hear from the lovely Marlo Nash, the National Director of Partnerships and Policy for St. Francis Ministries. And she told you a little bit about the excellent trauma-informed work that they are doing out in the community. Next is Jeff Held. He's the Policy Director at the Sumner M. Redstone Global Center for Prevention and Wellness at the Milken Institute School of Public Health. He works directly, that was a mouthful. He works directly with the Building Community Resilience Collaborative. Next actually is Erin Connolly, LCSW and certified yoga instructor. She also works as a school counselor in the Upper Darby School District, in addition to being a CTIP board member. Next is Jesse Kohler. You heard from him in the beginning if you got here a little bit early. He is the Director of Development at Northlight Community Center and an executive committee board member for CTIP, and soon to be my neighbor in Washington, D.C., as he is going to be doing a job change soon. So congratulations to Jesse today. And then that's me. I'm Whitney Maris, and I am finishing my Master of Social Work degree at the University of Buffalo, and I am an intern at the Institute on Trauma and Trauma-Informed Care. I'm going to pass it along to Dan at this point. He is, again, the heart and soul of our campaign and one of the major players in the policy arena for trauma-informed policies and practices.
Thank you, Whitney. Nobody's ever called a lawyer the heart of anything. We supposedly don't have them, but thank you, and thank all the volunteers who are on the phone or participating by video. My video is not working for some reason, so I'm just speaking on the phone. But CTIP, the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice, is a all-volunteer organization created 3 years ago because we felt there was a need for one organization whose sole mission was to promote trauma-informed policies and programs at the national level, at the local level, at the grassroots level. And like all of you, everybody involved with CTIP is a volunteer doing it because, again, like all of you, they share a passion for taking what science has taught us about trauma and put it to work in our national policies and our local policies. Just one quick example. Earlier, I guess late last year, the World Health Organization came out with a study that found that ACEs contribute $700 billion a year in healthcare costs alone. The federal government is carrying about over $200 billion of those costs. So ACEs is a tremendous burden on the country, but more specifically on the federal government. And yet there's virtually no trauma-informed legislation, no efforts to take what we now know about the causes and effects of trauma and put it to work in our programs. Congress continues to legislate programs that are seeking to solve problems by dealing with the symptoms instead of dealing with the underlying cause, which we all know is ACEs. Oop. When we first started 3 years ago, you could go up to Congress and say ACEs and people would think you're talking about a poker game. There was no knowledge. It's starting to change among the staff, but it's still at a very low level. And among the senators and congressmen themselves, there are only a handful who really understand the significance. So the campaign was created to change that. It's the most effective way to get to your congressmen and senators is for the people who vote for them to contact them. If you have a couple of $1 million, you can probably get an ambassadorship. But if you really want to get their attention, all you have to do is be a voter, be a constituent, and they pay attention to you. So the purpose of the campaign is for the constituents in every congressional district and every state to be educating their congresspeople and getting them to be aware of the incredible significance of trauma science for so much of what Congress does. And that's really why all of you on the phone are so important. As Jesse will get into, we've got several different ways of reaching your congressperson. One is just sending them emails. Secondly is educating the staff at the local level, where you could just walk in the door and ideally with an appointment, but walk in and meet them and talk to them and educate them, and the information will flow up from the local office to the Washington, D.C. office. And the third way, in some ways the most powerful way, is to take the staff and the senator or congressman when they're back in the state, take them on a visit to a trauma-informed program. Once you've seen a trauma-informed school or a trauma-informed police department, trauma-informed court, you'll never be the same. And seeing it in action is really the most powerful way of educating people. So that's what we're asking all of you to do. We really, again, appreciate your signing on. As others will get into, we're going to be making some adjustments in light of the COVID-19 crisis, but that doesn't really reduce the need. If anything, when all of the self quarantines are over, there's going to be an explosion of trauma on top of the trauma that we know already existed. So what we're working on is even more critical. So again, I'm going to turn it back to Whitney, Marlo, and just can't say thank you enough to all of you for joining on and being part of this really important initiative. Marlo?
So I am not Marlo, but I will happily over from here. We like to throw curveballs every once in a while and just keep it fresh. Well, thank you, Dan. Yeah, so like Dan said, you all as liaisons or organizations or supporters are the lifeblood of this campaign. The core team has been meeting since the summertime of 2019. And again, we launched February 11th of 2020. And now that we have been able to reach out to all of you, we're able to actually start moving toward our ultimate goal. In the first month, we did incredibly well with all of your support and reached nearly 250 people, having them sign up, which is an amazing start. There is still a lot of work to do, but as a completely grassroots bootstrapped campaign that didn't do this with any money, but just a lot of heart, a lot of knowledge, a lot of wisdom, and reaching out to people around the country, we've made a heck of a first start. Again, the major objective that we have is for there to be at least one liaison or supporter or organization in all 435 House districts to create relationships with the offices, with staff, get their contact information, open up lines of communication in all of those offices. While we do also want to reach all the senators, obviously, if we are able to get to 435 House offices, we will also be in all 100 Senate districts. So again, that 435 number is very, very big for us. Again, we encourage supporters and organizations to take on the role of a liaison as well. But the local liaisons, we have certain calls to action. You've all already seen email a few of these calls to action that you will be getting to do the communication with the offices. When the COVID-19, everything that's going on right now, when that settles down, we are going to again focus on our first real goal of opening up the campaign and trying to get House members to join the House Trauma Informed Care Caucus. If you get a no, that is okay, because if you get a person, if you get a staff member's email, if you know who we can reach out to, then that is a win. We don't expect for this to take a small amount of time. This is going to be an effort that ultimately, from now until the time that we pass comprehensive trauma-informed legislation, it could take 3, 5, maybe even more years. And so just starting that process and developing those relationships is so critical. So whether you're a local liaison who we will have high expectations for, or just individuals and organizations who sign on as members who we will also have high expectations for, we all have a role to play in this to reach out to all legislative districts around the country. We will be sending out calls to action, like I said, pretty regularly. So just keep an eye on email from us. Again, it will be coming from traumacampaign@gmail.com, which again, you will see. And just to throw in a little piece before I dive into the website, even though we had a great first month, there is still so much more that we can do. There's really strength in numbers when reaching out to Congress. When one person reaches out from their constituency, like Dan said, there's a lot of power there, and they'll probably listen. If 5, 10, 20, fill in the blank about what number, if more people reach out from their constituency, they will see the magnitude of the situation and be even more likely to come on board. So don't be afraid to, within your own networks, engage your coworkers, your colleagues, your peers to join on and join the campaign. All of this information, the links for them to sign up, as you all know, because you've already signed up, those can be found on our website, which now we can go to the next slide. And we will just go quick through the website where all of the information that you will need is going to be. We are going to continue to update this. In fact, the PowerPoint right now is on the bottom of this for you all to have access to. So there's information about our background, meeting the core team. This Caucus Ask Toolkit is going to be the Bible of the first phase of this campaign. It has information from the email template to information about the caucus to different social media posts, etc. This next section of constituent engagement is where people can sign up for the various roles that they have. If anybody wants to sign up as a local liaison, show them that Learn More button, and they will be able to get all the information that they need about what it means to be a local liaison. If there's any people who are just signed up as individuals right now who want to be a local liaison, feel free to sign up as a local liaison as well. And then underneath that, we have a litany of resources and advocacy tools from Jeff's Building Community Resilience Collaborative to the MARC conference. And then we have resources on ACEs and trauma. And then Whitney has created a number of great infographics that really take a wealth of information and a lot of different concepts and boil it down into something that is manageable and understandable for Congress people to get. Like Dan said, it's only been a few years that Congress has really understood ACEs, and they probably don't get it to the extent that each of the people on this call understand it. So letting them see a visual is a great way to engage them. And then again, that's our email at the bottom, traumacampaign@gmail.com. And you are always welcome to reach out with any questions, comments, concerns. Right now, it is a volunteer-led effort, so it might take us a few days to get back to you, but we'll always get back to you as soon as we can, and we want to be there to help you as you help us reach more people around the country. So with all of that, I will step back and lend the floor to Jeff Hild, who I am very happy to work with.
All right, thanks, Jesse. And I think I turned on my video there so you can see me from my makeshift quarantine office here. So thanks so much for being a part of this campaign, it's really exciting, I think, just to know the knowledge and the wisdom that's on this webinar now. And I think we're really excited of thinking about how we really harness all of that expertise and get it in front of policymakers in Congress. So I just wanted to kind of ground this piece of the presentation really in getting back to the purpose of our campaign. And that, as others have mentioned, is really to facilitate a concerted, coordinated, and strategic effort to educate all members of Congress about trauma, ACEs, and resilience. As Dan mentioned at the outset, we've seen some growth in understanding around the science of ACEs, some knowledge around what it takes to have a resilient community, and certainly that's improved over the last few years. But by and large, the vast majority of members of Congress do not understand what we mean when we say trauma-informed, don't understand the science of ACEs. And so our goal is to make sure that every member and their staff understands this work. And we designed the campaign in such a way to really focus on bringing that local knowledge to members. And as Dan mentioned, there's really nothing that's more valuable than a constituent doing innovative and important work in a member's district. We like to say that at Building Community Resilience that there's no data without stories and no stories without data. But I would say that elected officials love stories. It's kind of how they frame all of their work. And so you all bringing your work before elected officials, there's really a great amount of power in that, and a lot of power in your kind of local wisdom and knowledge. So we really wanted to have these local liaisons as the centerpiece of this campaign, and really as the interface with these offices. And there's a lot of work that folks who are based in DC, like myself or Dan, can do, but I can tell you from working on the Hill, when a meeting request comes in and it's from a constituent, that gets put into a different pile than if it's from someone who's not in the district. And so you all really can step into that power and that role that you'll have with this campaign. And as Jesse mentioned in launching the campaign, we had a goal for this year of both growing the campaign so that we have a local liaison in every congressional district, and also helping to build membership in the Congressional Trauma-Informed Caucus, which I'll kind of give some background to in a minute. But in keeping with those goals, we really need your help to do two things. So one is to continue to push to grow the campaign. And so you can do this by sharing information within your networks and with colleagues who might be in other congressional districts, or even within your own, to kind of grow the body of this campaign. And then the second thing that we want to activate you around is to ask your member of Congress to join the Trauma-Informed Caucus. And we'll talk about the timing of that here in a little bit, but I just wanted to give you some background about caucuses in general and about this caucus in particular. So caucuses are organizations in Congress where members kind of coalesce around a specific issue area. So you may have heard of big ones like the Congressional Progressive Caucus, but there tends to be a caucus around many different issues. So for instance, there's a Public Lands Caucus, or there's a Foster Care Caucus, and these are really ways for members to both show the importance of an issue. So if you have a caucus with a large number of members, it kind of shows leadership that there's an intensity level of doing work in that particular issue area that can be really important politically, and when it's time to move pieces of legislation. And these caucuses can also be forums to educate other members. And then ultimately, they can really be powerful voting blocks. So if you can bring a chunk of votes to House leadership and say, here's this constituency that wants you to insert a certain provision, or we're not going to vote for the overall bill, that's a really powerful tool. And so the Congressional Trauma Informed Care Caucus is relatively new. It was founded by Congressman Danny Davis, who's a Democrat from Chicago, Illinois, and Congressman Mike Gallagher, who is a Republican from Wisconsin. It has a handful of members now, and we've been working with Danny Davis's office and Mike Gallagher's office to think about ways we can work to grow membership. And so that's one of the first things we want you all to do. And when you're kind of interfacing with a congressional office, that education piece is super important, but the staff you're talking with always wants to know, what do you want me to do? And so it's really important to have this kind of concrete ask. So while you're talking about your trauma-informed program in your community and educating that staff member or that member of Congress, you have this ask of the thing that you want them to do. And so we want the Trauma-Informed Caucus ask to really be the centerpiece and sort of the means by which you can educate your member of Congress. So as folks certainly realize, the COVID-19 pandemic has really impacted the timing of making this asks as congressional offices are focused, almost entirely on responding to the pandemic. Staff are teleworking, they're answering constituent calls about this issue. And so, we're going to sort of wait until the time is right to really activate you around this. But, certainly in the meantime, we need that help in sort of spreading the word about the campaign. And that, is going to be tremendously helpful, as we move forward. We also want you to use the campaign platform and infrastructure to share, stories, success stories and lessons learned from your work. And ultimately, this will be a way to share some of those interactions you've had with congressional offices. And then we'll also be, we're going to continue to identify and provide liaisons with opportunities to engage in other activities that can further our goals. And so, we've talked about doing some type of screening around the film Resilience, providing you all with some tools around how to invite your local congressional office for site visits and that type of thing. So be on the lookout for those types of activities as we move forward. So I think we can go to the next slide. Great. So as you can imagine, things in Congress are in quite a bit of flux, and that certainly impacts our campaign. But the current pandemic, as Dan mentioned, also really, it helps us to understand the importance of trauma, adversity, and resilience in our work. And unfortunately, and suddenly now, we're seeing a lot of the underlying structural and systemic inequities and the adversities that are resultant from those really laid bare in this pandemic, whether that's lack of paid leave, access to childcare, and all these types of things. We're really seeing that the folks in our communities who are most vulnerable are really the ones who are going to bear the brunt of this pandemic. And so right now, Congress is moving through a series of what we'd call kind of shorter term responses. So far there's been 2 pieces of legislation passed. One was a supplemental appropriations earlier this month, really providing some just initial support to the public health response. The second was last week, and what folks are calling phase 2, or this was the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And that included things like partial paid leave, increases in nutrition assistance, a bump up in state support for Medicaid and child welfare, as well as increases in unemployment insurance and a whole host of other things. And as you've probably seen in news reports, right now they're working through phase 3 of this response, which is going to include a number of things for businesses, as well as increases in unemployment insurance payments to individuals, et cetera. Where we're really focused is on what that long-term response needs to be and how we incorporate trauma science into that response. And so we know that what's happening in our communities now is going to have impacts on child development. We also know that the sort of stresses associated, economic and otherwise, are really going to result in intergenerational transmission of trauma and adversity. You know, we're already sort of anecdotally seeing reports of increased use of domestic violence hotlines. Certainly, substance abuse is going to be at the forefront as folks are losing jobs, are at home, and then obviously children lacking the support and structures of schools during this time. So we know all of these are going to have a compounding effect going forward, and that the ultimate response needs to be a trauma-informed one. And so we're sort of actively working with our allies on the Hill to think about what those responses may be and trying to formulate a comprehensive policy response. And as we move forward, we'll certainly be bringing that to your attention. And hopefully, you know, in today's conversation, we can start to pull some of those ideas from you all. So I think I'm going to stop there and turn it back over to Whitney and Jesse.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. You know, I know that we dumped a lot onto you all in just the first half hour of this webinar. You know, but I've already seen the chat group and room light up a little bit. So we just wanted to open up the floor. Anybody with questions? Sonia, I know that you had one. If you, not to call you out, but if you want to start off, and then if we just want to go through some of the questions and thoughts that you all are having, that would be great.
Sure. And also, my name is Sade. For some reason, I'm logged in as my colleague, but it doesn't matter.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to know, and I'm very new to hearing about your work. I just joined Girls Inc. I wanted to know if there was some kind of scorecard or something where you were listing different trauma-informed care environments. I did some research on some of the early adopters and other places, but I didn't know if on your website or in general you all sort of endorse particular groups or entities that are doing this right and understand sort of the science around what ACEs is.
Is your question about community-based groups?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll start an answer, but I think there are probably a couple other folks on the line who can add to it. There are numerous, happily, collaborations around the country, and actually was part of the motivation for this campaign, because we knew that there were many, many, many people around the country organizing and advancing trauma-informed work, and that if we could collect them all up in a collective voice for Congress, we could do a lot of good. So I think the campaign itself does not play a role of endorsing any, and we're kind of we have a wide open door, and it's really anybody who cares about this topic and wants to engage with us, to engage with Congress, is welcome. But I think there's a more specific answer that maybe Dan or Jeff could give to some of the on-the-ground coalitions that we're aware of. And Dan, do you know where there's a listing of them? Does ACES Connection have a listing of them?
Yeah. ACES Connection, I mean, they have something like 40 or 50 different groups. I know they have a Native American group, and they have a Maryland group, and group by subject matter. ACES Connection is a wonderful resource for finding what's going on in the trauma-informed area. But CTIP doesn't endorse any single approach. I think this effort is so new that we're still trying things out, and we take a big tent attitude whatever seems to work in your community is what you should be doing. The one thing I would add, though, is that one of the things we do at CTIP is we host a monthly call called CTIP Community Advocacy Network, CTIP CAN, where after I get through spouting out about what's going on in Congress, we have presenters from different communities talking about the innovative programs they're doing. And it's a learning experience for everybody. Because this effort is also new, this is really the best way, is to hear what different communities are doing and then pull from that what makes the most sense for you. For example, in March, we're going to have somebody talking about a program for refugees being run in Atlanta to deal with the trauma the refugees face. And then somebody from the foster care community talking about how they're implementing the Family First Act. So it's a wide variety of programs. There's a good chance for you to learn what's going on around the country. I think Jesse has sent out information about how to call in. There's no charge. It's just wide open, but we'd welcome you to join us.
Yeah, everyone should have gotten information about the next several months of CTIP CAN calls, which has the call-in link. If anybody didn't, again, please do reach out to traumacampaign@gmail.com. Jeff, were you about to say something as well?
Yeah, so I was just going to add, so ASPE, which is the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation at the Department of Health and Human Services, had done some work over the past 2 years, kind of surveying various trauma-informed programs around the country, and have put out a couple of good reports that seek to pull out some of the core elements of those programs, and kind of better define what we mean when we say trauma-informed. And so we can certainly share that resource with you. But if you just Google ASPE trauma-informed, the reports will pop up, and that might be a nice resource for you as well.
Yeah, ASPE is the Assistant Secretary for Policy and Evaluation, right, Jeff?
Yes,
Is that right, Jeff?
I think I misstated the full acronym, but I think you've got it right, Dan.
Okay.
We've been around
too
long. You just speak in acronyms.
Yeah, I think both responses have been super helpful. I was really curious because we have so many affiliates that we would want to help. We would want them to sort of mobilize around it, and if there are places that they could sort of speak to as, I don't know, best practices, or they need support when they're engaging with their elected officials, I think that would be helpful. So thank you for those resources.
Where are you from, Sonia?
So I live in DC, but our affiliates are all throughout. Like we have 79 throughout the nation, including in Canada.
Oh, what organization is it?
Girls Inc.
I missed it. Oh, okay. Okay, great.
And this might be a good time, Jesse, and tell me if I have if this was already covered and I just missed it. But did we talk about CTAP? I know it was on one of the slides, but did we talk about it?
I don't think we did. So if you want to,
no, I blew it. So good.
Whitney, can you back up to it just so people have the? So another factor in motivating this campaign was the development of the Child Trauma and ACEs Policy Working Group, or CTAP. It's sponsored by Futures Without Violence, and it is a relatively young working group in DC terms, but it already has 57 national organizations, and Girls Inc. is one. So Sadia, your question and your voice on the call is what prompted me to make sure that everyone knows. So there are quite a number of well-known large national networks, and we're working in concert. So we're kind of the campaign arm and they are the legislative arm. So that policy working group is tracking legislation and helping us organize the national policy directors, organized to go on the Hill periodically and to arrange, excuse me, conversations with congressional offices about what policies they're writing and supporting, and to get ideas from CTAP. So want you all to know that we're connected we're connecting the grassroots with this, with CTAP, which is this more policy focused but large national and growing coalition. And we will be working on developing this comprehensive policy vision that we referenced a couple of times, and CTAP will be really involved in developing that comprehensive policy vision, so that once we have it, we've got everyone all on the same page, and we can just continue to grow the strength of our voice and influence together.
That's great. Thank you for that, Marlo. Thank you for that clarification. We have another question regarding the COVID response specifically. Kate said she's curious about the timeline of when a decision will be made regarding the push about the advocacy for more supports for mental health and supports for trauma healing and prevention as it pertains to COVID-19. Do we have a timeline? Any ideas?
Well, I can take the first shot at that. So, I mean, we'll have a sense, I think right now or this evening about what is going to be in this next phase of the legislation. I think this is, not ending with whatever Congress passes in the next week or so. And so it's going to be really important to continue raising these issues to the forefront. I think Congress is very focused on sort of the immediate emergency before us. And I think it's, given that, it's really easy for things to slip through the cracks. And so it'll be, incumbent upon us to continue raising these issues as we go forward. On the specific question around mental health supports, I'm not sure if someone else on the call has more guidance on that. I mean, what we've seen a push thus far has been around loosening barriers to telemental health. Obviously, that doesn't get at some of the underlying structural issues of there just not being enough mental health professionals, and also doesn't get to some of the accessibility issues of folks who really need those supports that may not have connectivity or a way to access them. We're seeing that with distance learning in schools now, right, of our most vulnerable kids sort of not able to participate in distance learning for that reason. So I don't know if anyone else would want to jump in. I mean, I've got some more thoughts I could share, but I'll let others chime in.
Yeah, let me jump in. The Child Abuse Coalition has put together a package of additional funding it believes necessary to deal with child abuse and related trauma issues during the actual epidemic. I sent out a letter to everybody on my list, and Jesse, you could send it out to the volunteers. So there is a campaign already underway to deal with the immediate emergency. But what we've been talking about is what happens after the epidemic is over. Everybody's going to say, okay, problem's gone. We can now just go back to life as normal, but we know that's not the case. All those kids who were cooped up in houses that there's a lot of trauma, all those people who, as Jeff's described, all the other people who are going to have their trauma levels increased as a result of the campaign are going to come out of isolation and going to be a problem. And we need to persuade Congress that it needs to have programs in place to deal with it. What those programs are, I guess we're still working through. I hope to have something in the next week or so, and we'll get it out to you. But it's something we just started talking about last week, and we're not there yet. And secondly, would appreciate advice, suggestions from everybody on the call. What do you think is needed to handle what I'm calling the mental health epidemic that's going to follow the end of the COVID epidemic? So if you have thoughts on what we ought to be asking Congress for, please get a hold of us, because you're out there in the field and you have much more immediate knowledge than we do.
Yeah. And like Jeff said earlier, we really rely and want for you all to share success stories with us in addition to ideas. So please do not hesitate to reach out about ideas, successes that you've had, resources that you are aware of that we may not be aware of. This is really a two-way street. So reach out to us as well. Marlo, it looked like you had something to say as well.
I was just going to add, I think probably a number of folks on the call have been involved in some type of unexpected event, whether for me was Oklahoma City bombing and responding to some tornadoes when I lived in Oklahoma. And so there are weather events and events like 9/11. And what happens after those, the onset of those events is that there's a scramble of, just trying to do the immediate response and everyone trying to figure out, what's going on and what's needed. And so I think the timing of our really feeling like there's receptivity, the ability to think about something else in a sense of congressional offices and things like that, it's probably going to be organic as to when that is. But we are talking about it and thinking about it, and also thinking about what can be done in the meantime, which in our campaign team meeting last week, one of the things we came up with is definitely, while we're trying to sort of figure this out, let some things play out and identify what role our campaign can play and what the right time is to do that. To have you all really helping grow the campaign in the meantime, it would be tremendously valuable. So promoting it to your networks. Jeff gave you some ideas. We can do a webinar about the campaign to any of your groups if you'd like to set something like that up. We have the goal, as Jesse said, about getting at least one person or organization connected to every single congressional office. So we can do all those things together with you while we are trying to find the right moment to really have a call to action specific to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I actually saw in the chat, someone suggested, I think Kate, maybe it was you, suggested that maybe there be viewing party. I'm looking, want to attribute it to the right person. Yeah, Kate suggested, could there be live watch parties for Paper Tigers and Resilience and some of the other films? And I shared that and Dan, you've spearheaded this, so you can speak to this more, but we've developed this relationship with the producers of those films, and they've given us access to the films and to some of the clips they've developed and some of their materials in support of this campaign. And actually having watch parties while people were quarantined was one idea that we had. We talked last week. So Kate, thank you for bringing that up. Melissa in the chat shared a great resource that Jesse, we probably want to see about adding on the website, but it looks like ACES Connection already has a how to host a film screening guide, which is great. So we can help share that. And so we, hearing from you today or after today about how we can support you having viewing parties and what kinds of tools would help you have the right kind of helpful conversations after is another thing that could go on right now. But Dan, do you want to say anything else about the partnership we have with the producers?
Sure. They have said the films and 5-minute clips of them, depending what you need, are available to everybody and anybody on the campaign. So if you think there's an opportunity to have a viewing party, or you want to have a 5-minute clip on your laptop when you take it in to visit a congressional staffer, just let us know and we'll connect you with the producers team, and they will make it available to you. They really have been extraordinarily generous.
Yeah, that's great. Unless there's anything else, I will go on to the next question, which is from Kate. And there's another, Kate's really the rock star of this group chat. She and Melissa are killing it. Um,
Mhm.
but so Kate, I see that you have another comment below, so I will get to that, and I think that it may answer what I'm about to answer. But in terms of CTIP, compiling a list of trauma-informed responses for communities in light of COVID-19, at our last board meeting, we did discuss that. I will acknowledge that CTIP is a bit of a slow-moving animal. So
Mhm.
while we do want to get COVID-19 responses out, again, we're an all-volunteer board, and so we will try to get as many resources up as possible to help communities. We want to be that centralizing hub for this type of work. Again, that is a place where you all, if there are resources that you have available, and Kate, that's where I think that I see that you may have some quotes and graphics about COVID. If you have resources that we could utilize, that would help us in hastening our process to get that out to the rest of the world or whoever it is that looks at ctip.org. So just to acknowledge that. Yeah, I think that that's all that I had on that. Are there anyone else about that? No, I think that was kind of a one-off. So are there any other questions that anybody has? We have 8 minutes left on the webinar, not that we can't go over, but any other questions, thoughts, concerns that anyone has as we move forward as a group with this?
While we're waiting, I'll just add in, you triggered the thought for me, Jesse, that any kind of, for those of you who work in trauma, your organizations work in trauma, if you have video clips or materials or handouts or anything like that that could be brought into the campaign, we've called this kind of a big tent campaign. It's not heavily branded by design because we want everyone to feel like they are a part of it. You are a part of it. So if your organization has materials, we'd love to work with you to help amplify their distribution, and they can stay branded with your organization if that's something your organization needs, and we can bring them into the campaign. So just be thinking about anything you've developed to use locally that you think could be translated to national use, or just to share with others for local use. We'd love to talk with you about that. And one of the things we'd like to do more of that we haven't done so much yet is social media and digital media. So if you, in particular, if you have video clips or things like that we can start pulling together and get more active in that space, that would be great. We would welcome that.
Absolutely.
The president said within a couple of weeks this is all going to be over. So we can, but seriously, I think it's not going to be that long before the Hill staffers are going to be somewhat back to normal, in which they can think about other things besides the epidemic. And it'll be time to launch the outreach to the staffers and the emails asking them to join the Congressional Trauma-Informed Caucus. So it's not that far away. I was talking to somebody from New York State who's been lobbying the New York State legislature, and she said she's gotten a very good response even now, talking about New York. A couple of New York State legislators introduced a constitutional amendment that would require every institution, state institution, every subdivision of the state to implement trauma-informed practices. And she's been calling the offices of all the different New York State legislators to advocate for that. And she said, despite the epidemic, people are open and interested to talking about this issue, and particularly once they get the connection. So I think we're going to be able to get back into full spring, I don't know, stream, whatever, within a relatively short time.
Yeah.
I have a question. This is Sarah Shea. I'm out of Utah. Are we, Dan? I don't want to cut you off or interrupt you, but
No, I'm done.
Okay. Well, it's nice to meet you all. But I'm just kind of curious, kind of given the like acute nature of the COVID-19 crisis and pandemic, if your kind of group and organization is kind of rethinking how you're triaging priorities for making contact with, legislators, and kind of how you're focusing on making your asks, because I think there's kind of like a balance between, this ongoing psychoeducation, wanting to kind of pass on or press states to focus on adopting, trauma-informed approaches, but then also recognizing that there's a really pressing need for immediate action on, passing legislation that's going to fund specific programs to kind of support all of the need that's going to be coming out of this. So I'm not sure, kind of thoughts on that, or ways that we can kind of utilize our resources right now in the best way possible.
We certainly thank you for the question, Sarah, and I'm sure that some of my colleagues will have a better answer than I, so I'll keep mine short. But we definitely agree, which is why we're sort of putting the organization and developing a broader network at this time for the campaign, because we recognize that we're on the back burner and there are things that are more in the forefront that need to be tackled. And so right now, resources for liaisons can be best utilized to grow the campaign, so that way when all of this is out of the way or starting to move out of the way, we are able to kick off in full swing while still modeling ourselves as being trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive, and recognizing where Congress is right now and what all they're going through and trying to work through at the current moment. So engaging your networks, reaching out to others, trying to get them to join the campaign for when we are able to move forward with this is a great use of time and resources right now.
But let me add, I think your point is really well taken, and I think we need to get our butts moving to do exactly what you said, and to be ready to switch directions a little bit anyway, and come up with some good arguments on why trauma-informed approaches are needed in light of the COVID-19 epidemic, and get you materials on that. But in the same time, I would ask everybody on the phone to give us your ideas on how we can do that, what your thinking is on how we tie the two together, and get the conversation to where the heads of our elected officials are right now. So please give us your thoughts.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. I can't say that I have thoughts as to how to move forward or accomplish this. Utah's definitely had some interesting kind of legislation passed in the past couple of years in response to increases in suicidality and kind of mortality rates here regarding the opioid crisis that I think are good examples of, well, a component of a trauma. Well, I don't know actually if the if some of the programs implemented could be called trauma informed, but I don't know. I definitely have I'm definitely have an implementation minded brain, but really excited to be part of this effort as a whole. But thanks for addressing my questions.
The other, and shooting from the hip here, but another thing that it occurs to me that you could start watching for is if your representative or senators host any kind of tele town hall, or they may be using unique ways to be in touch with their constituents while everyone's on quarantine. So if there are things like that they open up, teleconferences or video conferences or something to hear from their constituents during the shutdown, that could be a great way for you to participate in those and raise the need for a trauma response now in a forum where they are ready to listen. Because that's, I think, what we're finding. I mean, like right now they're getting barraged with phone calls after probably working 20-hour days on specific to legislation that's active right now. And I can only imagine that there's probably, this, as I said earlier, their ability to even to be receptive to new information would be challenging for anybody. However, if they set up a time to hear from constituents, they've made that brain space to talk with you and hear from you. And so that's the opening that you could step into. And we, like I said, the campaign team hasn't really talked about that. It just came to mind as we were talking today. So one of the things we could do, team, is regroup and see if there's anything we could do to support folks. Because I have to imagine that, especially in an election year, that members of Congress are going to figure out ways to be in touch with their constituents while everyone's quarantined.
This is Mary Beth from Utah.
Hey, Mary Beth.
Hey, Dan. Just one other thought along those lines. I really appreciated the email you sent out with the information about the potential impact on child abuse and neglect, domestic violence, all of those issues. I passed that along to my colleague here who works with our Department of Child and Family Services, and he is going to be alerting their staffs just to be more aware of this, as well as their leadership. And I think it might be sort of a backdoor if we can think about, we have the crisis, but it's going to be the delayed crisis of all of those pieces that we begin to see when kids do start going back to school, other issues coming up. And I could see our folks, when they recognize that the bump in those incidents could very well be related to this, that's something that they could also go to their agency leadership as well as our representatives here to talk about. One of the, they talk about flattening the curve. Well, that curve is going to hit even maybe just a little bit later, and being aware of that and how do we respond to it, that could be kind of maybe another piece of all this.
Yeah, it's that second bump that we've got to make them aware of. And that's the challenge there. Right now, they're so focused on the first bump, on the immediate medical bump and economic bump. But I think that's really a good way to go about doing it. And Jesse, if you could take that email I sent out and send it to all the volunteers on campaign volunteers, because I sent it out to the CTIP canalists, but I didn't send it out to the volunteers unless you have.
Which email is it? I'm happy to share an email.
Yeah. I'll resend it if you want. I sent it yesterday.
Okay.
Or maybe.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
This is Sarah again in Utah. And I'm a colleague of Mary Beth. So hi, Mary Beth. One thing that I've been thinking about is just I think it's really important to emphasize that, COVID-19 is just like another example of a trauma that a person can experience during their lifetime. And so I think there's a unique opportunity. I mean, we're in the midst of this pandemic, and it's affecting, just a vast number of people. And it's kind of a unique opportunity to really speak in real time to say, this is what a trauma-informed approach is meant for. Substitute a COVID-19 pandemic with, domestic violence or a medical trauma or, some other type of trauma. But I think it's an interesting I think it's really important for us as we're having these conversations to really make sure that we're coming back to that idea that trauma-informed approaches are meant to address a wide variety of experiences. And again, trauma ACEs, they look different for every person, but it's that idea of that cumulative effect. And so, really thinking about it from that perspective is important. And I mean, it's a great opportunity for us to engage with people who might be skeptical, but suddenly are feeling the effects in their own communities in ways that they didn't want to acknowledge beforehand.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's terrific. Go ahead, Jess.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, these are, you're absolutely right. This is an opportunity to help someone see that overwhelming absolute mindset that can go along with that, because we are also worried. I mean, that's potentially a way into these conversations. So I think that you're spot on.
Yeah. On the other hand, it's not going to be easy. When Congress was racing its way through the opioid legislation, we tried to get them to recognize that so much of opiate abuse is the result of trauma, and they just brushed it off. It was like this truck caroling down the hill. So it's going to take some real work to get them to think deeper, but I think it's absolutely critical, and we should take advantage of the opportunity. So we're going to need your help, Mary Beth and Sarah, and everybody else on the line.
Yeah. So if there are not any more questions or thoughts, just from everybody on the core team, thank you. We really hit the nail on the head with the title of this slide. We don't heal in isolation, but in community. And I think that this webinar, getting to hear from many of you and talk about this with people from across the country, really highlights this. We are so excited to move forward through this process with you all. Again, please do not hesitate to reach out to us with any questions, with any resources, with any ideas. Everything that we talked about today is really just the beginning of a potentially years-long journey together. And we're just so grateful to each of you for signing up and being a part of this with us. And we are truly excited to make the difference that we believe we're going to make someday. So thank you all for joining us so much. We have recorded this webinar, so we'll be sharing it out to share with, to watch again or share with any of your coworkers who may want to join. And again, just never hesitate to reach out.
Jesse, one more thing. This is Mimi from Florida. It was so helpful. Bob's email the other day with a list of ways that we could really be having a more trauma response in our communities. And I forwarded that to our mayor and our community mental health, and they're having a meeting on Friday and really embraced it. So maybe we'll see a new receptivity that we hadn't seen before. I also got a call from our child welfare. Our folks are really stressed out now. I mean, they're stressed out working at home with their own kids and trying to do conference calls with kids tantruming at home. And there's just a lot of stresses. And I think we're realizing how interconnected we all are, that childcare is really necessary for people to work, and really seeing maybe it'll break down the silos, but I'm very encouraged by the hope and the kindness that people are showing. And I hope that this will be a real reset button for us. So thank you for all your leadership in helping make this happen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mimi.
All right, everyone. I think that Mimi, on that note, one thing that we can definitely do is make Bob's ITRC report available for people. You know, and building resilience in communities to respond to this emergency and future emergencies is critical. So we can do that.
Good.
Yeah. So again, thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Really appreciate your time today.
Well,
Take good care.
Thank you.
We'll be
Stay
back in
yeah,
touch.
everyone stick.
See you later. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye.